like eagles.
Good morning. We're going to be looking at Elijah. I'm going to start off by reading 1 Kings 17, which is the introduction to Elijah. A little bit of context. We looked a little while ago at the Temple of Dagon and the statue falling over in front of the Ark of the Covenant. This happens several hundred years, well not several, 300 or 400 years before where we are now. In that time, Israel was very tribal. And since then, they became a nation under Saul, and then David, and then Solomon. And then after Solomon, the kingdom divided into two halves. We had the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. In the southern kingdom, the temple is still there, and the worship of Yahweh takes place around the temple. In the northern kingdom, they don't have the temple, and so they drift away from the worship of Yahweh. And the common religion, if you like, of the time, of the day in the area was the worship of the Baal or the Baalim. Now Baalim just means Lord or Lords, and each of the Baalim was a sort of separate god that was maybe territorial or over a particular area of life. But there was a sort of hierarchy of these Baalim. And the most important thing about the Baalim was that they were the ones you went to for fertility, for harvest, for rain, for the general running of your life. The northern kingdom at this time is governed by Ahab, who is the king of the time. He's actually got quite a difficult job. He's keeping the northern kingdom quite wealthy, but he's keeping it in the context of the surrounding nations, which are very powerful, much stronger than he is, could invade him at any time, and he has to keep lots of treaties and keeping people happy in order to keep the kingdom free. He does this by a variety of ways, one of which was the age-old way of marrying important people from those other kingdoms, and he's married Jezebel, who is the daughter of a priestess of Baal. So the northern kingdom is pretty well bought in to the teaching of the Baalim, and the southern kingdom is still following the teaching of Yahweh. Into this environment, God raises a prophet. He raises this prophet Elijah. And Elijah goes to the king of the northern kingdom, Ahab, to call him back away from the Baalim to following Yahweh. Now, Elijah is a very important individual. Remember that on the Mount of Transfiguration, which we'll come to in a few talks' time, Jesus appears on the Mount of Transfiguration with Moses and with Elijah. So Jesus is sort of saying, if you want to look at the history and all the teaching of the Old Testament, you can sum it up with Moses and Elijah. So Elijah is this pivotal prophet who represents the power of Yahweh. So as we read this story, remember who the Baalim claim to be. They claim to be the people who have authority over productivity, the harvest, and your general life. Now Elisha the Tishbite of Tish in Galilee said to Ahab, so he sort of walks into Ahab's palace, so he's probably pretty well known in the time, as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, before whom I stand, there shall be neither dew nor rain these years, except by my word. So that's a direct challenge to the teaching of the Baal, the belief in the Baalim, because this was what the Baalim were supposed to do. They were supposed to send dew and rain. And the word of the Lord came to him, depart from here and turn eastwards and hide yourself by the brook of Cherith, which is east of the Jordan. You shall drink from the brook, and I have commanded the ravens to feed you there. So he went and did according to the word of the Lord, and he went and lived by the brook of Cherith, that is east of the Jordan. And the ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning, and bread and meat in the evening, and he drank from the brook. And after a while the brook dried up, because there was no rain in the land. It's not surprising that the brook dried up. The sort of word here for brook could be translated as wadi, which sort of means a water area which is seasonal, that in the really hot season in the middle of summer it's supposed to dry up, it's expected to dry up. So Elijah is sent to the east of the country to live off the land, and then the land dries up, but God then sends him to the west of the country, to a widow in Zarephath. Then the word of the Lord came to him, arise and go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon. And now we're on the complete west side of the area, on the coast. It's interesting to think that this area was about a third the size of Wales or the Midlands. So these journeys aren't colossal. They are maybe a day or two, or three perhaps. The terrain was very varied and quite difficult, but it's not huge areas. Big enough to be a challenge to cross, but not big enough to make it impossible to cross. Arise, go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, and dwell there. It's interesting also that Sidon was sort of outside of Israel, and Cherith was on the borders of Israel. So he's sort of covering the whole of the territory. So he rose and went to Zarephath, and when he came to the gate of the city, behold, a widow was there gathering sticks. And he called to her and said, bring me a little water in a vessel that I may drink. Remember, we're in the middle of a drought. And as she was going to bring it, he called to her and said, bring me a morsel of bread in your hand. And she said, as the Lord your God lives, I have nothing baked, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug. and now I'm going to gather a couple of sticks that I may go in and prepare it for myself and my son, that we may eat it and then die. And Elijah said to her, do not fear. Go and do as I have said, but first make me a little cake of it and bring it to me, and afterwards make something for yourself and for your son. For thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, the jar of flour shall not be spent, and the jug of oil shall not be empty until the day the Lord sends rain upon the earth. And he went and did, and she went and did as Elijah said. And she and her household ate for many days. The jar of flour was not spent, neither did the jug of oil become empty, according to the word of the Lord that he spoke by Elijah. So a direct challenge to the authority of the day, to the Balaam, that God took what they said they could do, stopped it, and then did what they could not do, and fed these people. And he does it on both the extreme west and the extreme east of the nation, a symbolic area that God is ruler over all. And this, the son of the woman, the mistress of the house, became ill. And his illness was so severe that there was no breath left in him. And she said to Elijah, what have you against me, O man of God, that you come to me to bring my sins to remembrance and to cause the death of my son? And he said to her, give me your son. And he took him from her arms and carried him up to the upper chamber where he lodged, and laid him down on his own bed. And he cried out to the Lord, to Yahweh, O Lord my God, have you brought calamity even upon the widow with whom I sojourn by killing her son? Then he stretched himself upon the child 3 times and cried to the Lord, O Lord my God, let this child's life come into him again. And the Lord listened to the voice of Elijah, and the child, and life came into the child again, and he revived. And Elijah took the child and brought him down from the upper chamber to the house and delivered him to his mother. And Elijah said, see, your son lives. And the woman said to Elijah, now I know that you are a man of God, and the word of the Lord is in your mouth, that the word of the Lord in your mouth is true. So we're introduced to Elijah. And the picture given to us is that he goes to the extreme east, he goes to the extreme west. He is able, by God's hand, to bring feeding to the people who were starving in the middle of a drought. And remember, it's the job of the Balaam to make sure that there is dew and water and rain. That God stops. And then not only that, God is able, through Elijah, to show that he's Lord over life and Lord over death. And we've also have the picture here that Elijah doesn't say this happened by accident. He said, you, Lord, allowed this child to die, and you, Lord, are able to raise the child. So the picture we're given is that of the complete lordship of God, of Yahweh, even at a time when the northern kingdom has left the teaching of God. It's gone after the Balaam. It's following pragmatic ways of becoming wealthy and staying alive rather than following God's teaching. The interesting thing is that God takes that which is under the control of the Balaam, supposedly, and uses it to show his own power. Now, we could compare a lot of that with today's situation in our countries today. I just want to say that what God is saying to us here is to trust him. He will not be mocked. Just as the temple of Dagon fell over and God has his way in the end, so here the drought came, the food dried up, but God is making his point. God is able to feed even the widow and her household in this difficult time. And Elijah, representing God here, shows that he is God over the east, the west, the food, life and death.
your breath in our lungs. So we pour out our praise, we pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs. So we pour out our praise to you only. It's your breath in our lungs. So we pour out our praise, we pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs. So we pour out our praise to you only. And all the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. And all the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. And all the earth will shout your praise. These hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. One more time. And all the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs. So we pour out our praise, we pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs. So we pour out our praise to you only. It's your breath in our lungs. So we pour out our praise, we pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs. So we pour out our praise to you only. It's your breath in our lungs. So we pour out our praise, we pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs. So we pour out our praise to you only. Into your hands I commit again all I am for you, Lord. You hold my world in the palm of your hand, and I am yours forever. Jesus, I believe in you. Jesus, I belong to you. You're the reason that I live, the reason that I sing with all I am. the reason that I live, the reason that I sing with all my heart.
The name Elijah means Yahweh is my God. And this chapter starts off with the statement, now Elijah. So if we understand the meaning of the name, now the Lord is my God, the Tishbite in Gilead comes to Ahab. There are two big players in this chapter, the person of Elijah and the person of God. Elijah's purpose is to go before Ahab, or go before, we can see Ahab as representing the powers of the world, the state, the government, and to say to them, you're putting your trust in your own beliefs, your own traditions. It is God, the Creator God, to whom you should be placing your trust. And the chapter goes on to show the expanse of God's power, that God is not standing back from the world and from humanity. He is involved, and he's listening, and he's aware of the situations and the problems that we're in. Remember that the Balaam, their role was to provide food and water and fire as well, which we come to in another chapter. And God is able to say, no, I'm going to stop all the power of the Balaam, take it all away, go and make all the sacrifices you want, go and call upon them. I've closed that down. And he causes the famine and the drought. So the next lesson we learn from that is that Elijah, when he finds himself in this situation, does not rebel. He does not complain about what God is doing. He's submitted to it. But he has total confidence that God is in control and that God has him, Elijah, in his hands. So what we can learn from that is that when we find ourselves in difficult situations, we're often brought to a place where we are petitioning God to change the circumstance, as opposed to petitioning God to give us strength and insight to see it through and to see what God is saying and God's solution at the end. God takes Elijah to this brook, which is a wadi, which is going to dry up anyway. Elijah doesn't complain. He follows what God is doing, and so is able to proclaim through his testimony that God is able to use nature to feed him and to sustain him. It's interesting that he goes outside of Israel. So God is the God not just of Israel, but of all the nations. Following this, they go to Sidon on the coast. So he crosses right across and goes to another group of people, the Phoenicians, who weren't Israelites. So again, God is the God of all people. And here God does the complete opposite. He doesn't use nature to feed Elijah. He contradicts nature. Here he uses the miraculous, unscientifically impossible miraculous. He leaves the jar of oil never running out, continually being refreshed by a miraculous way. There's no other way to see the meaning of this passage than God is just showing. He is above science. He's above nature. So on one hand, he can use nature, and the next statement, he is above nature. Elijah, again, just submits to the circumstance, and Elijah's great strength is in his trust. Not in his complaining, not in his petitioning, not in his wanting to change things, but in his trust. All the way through Elijah's life and work, he is the mouthpiece of God. He says what God wants to be said. He doesn't try and alter the circumstance. He follows God's leading and has confidence in what God is doing. Then we have life and death. God is Lord over death. God allows the child to die. But God is Lord over life, and he resurrects the child. So we have this statement in this chapter of the complete power and authority of God. And Elijah is the example as the person who patiently follows God's leading, does not rebel against God, and submits to God's will and sees God's blessing. Is that something we can do? There is a twist in this whole story, that Elijah, who here in this chapter appears to be the perfect man, following the perfect God, as his life and ministry goes on, we see in Elijah cracks. We see his humanity coming forward. We see that he comes to a place where he says, I'm worn out, and enough is enough. He almost gives up, but he does give up. So what we can take from that is that God uses Elijah. God chose Elijah knowing that this was a frail vessel. There is sometimes a sort of comparison we can make here with Jesus. In Jesus, we have the perfect man and the total authority of God. And in this chapter, we have a picture of the total authority of God and almost the perfect prophet. But unlike Jesus, Elijah is frail. Elijah has failings and effectively gives up. Is that encouraging to us? God chose Elijah. God chose somebody like Elijah. If you're not perfect, if you're somebody who wants to see the majesty of God, who wants to be submitted to the will of God, who wants to follow God in your life, but says, sometimes it's just too hard. I become too anxious. I become too frightened. I become too whatever. Well, so did Elijah. He starts in this way, but we'll go on to see what happens to him. The encouraging thing is that God uses a humble, broken, imperfect human being to bring his will and his message to the people around him. And if God can use Elijah, he can use you.
We bow down and confess you are Lord in this place. We bow down and confess You